politics and above religion, a moral authority exists known globally as the Ageless Wisdom. It is the study of consciousness, the mystery of awareness, which cannot be measured, yet will not be denied. Stay tuned as we explore consciousness, the fundamental nature of reality. Welcome to the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School with Michael Benner.
Hello, friends and neighbors. It's KPFK on your radio at 90.7 FM. My name's Michael Benner, and this is the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, heard every Tuesday at 1 o'clock all across Southern California and live streaming on the internet. Pleasure to be with you today, as always. Another really good show. We're going to talk about meditation and other spiritual practices, some really simple and practical things that you can do, especially if you're a beginner. You know, if you're one of those people who said, oh yeah, meditation, I did that once. I tried that, didn't do very well at it. Well, you need a teacher, you need a guide, and like anything else, we have to practice. I think sometimes that, for me anyway, learning meditation was sort of like teaching a puppy to sit and stay. You know, the puppy doesn't want to sit and stay. It wants to jump up and play and run with you. And so to your mind, thinking is what it does, you know. And also I think we set some false goals. We've heard here or there that meditation is about ceasing thought, stopping it altogether. Well, good luck with that. That's never going to happen. So what is it? Well, we've got an expert guest with us today who's going to fill us in, and we're going to talk about a meditation practice to get you started and begin pretty quickly to enjoy the benefits, and that'll hook you on the pleasures of learning to sit quietly. It's quite remarkable, something I've been doing for over 40 years, and every day to have that available to you in a world that's getting increasingly chaotic and frenetic is just such a wonderful resource. I guess today's been with us before on KPFK, but it's been quite a while since I interviewed him. It's a pleasure to have him back on the air again. He works out of the Los Angeles area, the San Fernando Valley, but you'll also find him bouncing all over. He's often out in Catalina doing spiritual awakening events as well. And it's Patrick Harbula, author of Magic of the Soul, and a book simply called Meditation, a simple and practical way for beginners to learn how to meditate. And Patrick, good afternoon, and welcome to KPFK.
Good afternoon, Michael. It's so great to be back, and I love KPFK, and I love it even more that you're back now. So it's so great to see you and hear you.
Well, thanks a lot. I enjoy being back too. It's fun. I have a different guest every week, and been calling up some old friends and putting them back on the air, reconnecting. It's really revitalized my whole life. And I'm getting a lot of good feedback. People seem to really be enjoying the guests that we have and the benefits that they're getting from finding spirituality. And I mean it almost in a non-religious way. Spirituality and metaphysics and mysticism and such is such an anchor for me. Personally, I see it almost as a science, you know, about energy. We may call it spirit, which really comes from the word breath. But to me, it's energy. It's just like Einstein putting the equal sign between matter and energy and saying, all this that appears solid out here, it's really energy. Every single bit of it is energy. And so you are energy and I am energy. And we're often not taught that, but that impacts on consciousness and awareness. And that's the work that you do. I'm wondering, Patrick, how did you get involved in this whole field? You've been dedicated to it for so long. What was your entry point into spirituality?
Well, you know, I was always just an introspective child, and I was raised Catholic. You mentioned spirituality not necessarily being religious. And what I have found is the more structured a religion is, the less spiritual it tends to be. So when I was in 5th grade in Catholic school, I declared myself an atheist, at least for a while, because I just didn't believe a lot of what was being said once I reached the age of reason. And then in high school, I just started thinking, there must be some kind of higher power, but it certainly isn't the higher power that I was been told about, some, individual man in the clouds, right? And I just began to get a sense. And then I was so fortunate that at 18 years old, I did the math, and I've got 6 years on you meditating, because I started at 18.
Wow.
I'm 64. So my boss, I was working at a place called Paramount Sports, stringing tennis rackets. My first job started at 16 actually, and at 18, maybe 17 even. My boss invited me he was a great businessman. Rick Bednarik was his name, and he invited me to come to this program called Mind Probe 1. And it was a meditation practice, an intuitive or psychic development practice, included energy healing. So I learned all this stuff when I was 18 years old, and I really hadn't gotten, I was very much into philosophy, but mostly Western philosophy up to that point. And I hadn't studied much Eastern philosophy, but as a result of my meditation practice, I had some mystical experience and experienced what we call oneness, or just, merging with the infinite presence, the energy that you were talking about, spirit as we call it. And I started to develop my own philosophy around that. And then around 23, I discovered Science of Mind and what's now called Centers for Spiritual Living, and got involved in that. I found that there's a community of people that also meditated and understood, had actual phrasing and explanations for what I had experienced in this oneness. So that's the short end of it.
Well, it sounds really similar to my experience. Mind Probe must have been very much like the old Silva Mind Control.
I was going to say that. Very much. In fact, it has the same color cycle, going from red through, that was the beginning of the meditation practice or form, was going through the color spectrum from red to orange, yellow, green, indigo, blue, and then white, right? Was the entrance into the meditative practice.
Yeah, Silva had a technique where you would count backward 3 to 1. You would visualize the number 3 in 3 different ways, like on a typewriter or a Roman numeral or a different font, and then the number 2 in 3 different ways, and feel your body softening and sort of melting and yielding, and then visualize the number 1 in 3 different ways. But they also taught the brainwave levels. We understood what the beta level was, and then alpha and theta and delta. And it was basically a class. They never used the word hypnosis, but I took it in the mid-70s. It was basically a class in self-hypnosis. And I was surprised how many meditators that I've met since are either unaware of or often even afraid of the idea of hypnosis. And yet it was self-hypnosis and learning the principles of hypnosis that led me to things like Science of Mind and eventually to meditation. Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes, that was a real important book for me. And then books like Psychocybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, and reading the Edgar Casey books, that flipped me out. So it was a wealth of material out there. So when did you start doing the spiritual unity movement? How long have you been doing that?
Well, I started doing spiritual unity movement. The main activity is full moon meditations, group meditations at the time of the full moon. And so I started doing full moon meditations, back, I must have been, around 24 or 25 when I found Science of Mind, also found the Ageless Wisdom teachings, Alice Bailey and Theosophy. And so there was a lot of back then, a lot of full moon groups through the Alice Bailey teachings. And so I started out started my own full moon group back then, long before I got involved with spiritual unity movement, got involved with the Los Angeles Intergroup Committee, which was a group that connected many different full moon groups. And so we started doing full moon meditations for the first 3 festivals, we call them, of spring, first 3 full moons of spring, at the Onion in the San Fernando Valley back in the 80s. And so I was very involved in that. And then around 2000, friend of mine, Jane Watkins, rest her soul, asked me to get involved with Spiritual Unity Movement and bring the full moon celebrations back to the Onion, which we started doing and have been doing now since 2000, early 2000. And now we're doing online during COVID, but hopefully going back to in person soon.
You know what I liked about it? Your events, I guess, are all virtual now. You're online, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a few minutes, I give you a chance to give email addresses or websites or whatever so people can find out more about what you do. I want to talk about your Catalina Island events, too. I always love Catalina. And I guess you guys go around the back side, right?
Right. We go to the undeveloped side. Parsons Landing is the beach that we get to have to ourselves for 4 days. This coming one is on September 26th through the 29th, Sunday through Wednesday. And, you know, as I was describing to you before we started the interview, you were asking, so what do you teach? And we don't teach anything. In fact, it's the opposite. I like to call it the anti-workshop because it's not about learning new ideas because we're bombarded with information and teaching and practices. You know, we do practices, we do meditation, but it's mostly experiential. And so rather than, me telling you what, ideas or concepts, it's about people getting in touch with out of our heads into our bodies, into our hearts, connecting with Mother Earth and Father Sky, and just everyone's encouraged to just be who you are in the moment. And, this is how it occurred to me. In Western culture, how we usually learn is, we want to learn something, so we get a book or we Google it, and so we get the information mentally, and then we start to understand it and it sinks down to the emotional nature. And then we get excited about it. We put it into practice and it comes down to physical. But when you're in nature, and we do all of our retreats in nature, whether it's Catalina or I've done them in Canada in different places, when you're in nature and you see a hawk fly and you get an understanding from that, then it's an instant download, mental, emotional, and physical. You don't have to go through those 3 stages, right? It's a holistic download of information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, indeed it does.
And that's as opposed to knowledge. That's what we call wisdom, right?
Yeah, wisdom transcends knowledge in many ways.
Right.
I often think wisdom begins with an awareness of how much we do not know.
Right.
Opening to, or another way of talking about that is the way in which understanding can transcend knowledge. Like, I know this and that, but do I really understand it?
Mm-hmm.
That might be another way of looking at it.
Exactly, yeah.
Is it really integrated in a meaningful way? I think it's the philosopher Blaise Pascal who said, and I can only paraphrase, but it's something like, the source of all man's problems begins with his inability to sit still, quietly, alone in a room.
Wow.
Something like that. And I've noticed over the years that that can be a challenge for people. They get very uncomfortable when they just sit quietly. So it seems like one of the barriers to meditation is just learning to turn within and begin to feel comfortable in your own skin.
Good point. You mentioned that meditation isn't necessarily about ceasing thought. And I love that. How I define it in the book, meditation, is rather than defining meditation as silent mind or even quiet mind, I like to define it as cycling in and out of silent mind or quiet mind, because everything in nature, everything in life goes in cycles, right? And so, because if I'm defining, and this is why I think so many people give up meditation, it's because they think, oh, I've got this monkey mind going on, so I just can't do it, right? and then you judge yourself that you're not doing it right, and then you give up. But if you define it as cycling in and out of silent or quiet mind, then if your mind is quiet for 1 second, you're doing it right. And then just the more we practice, like exercising any muscle, the better we get at it, and the longer that the silent time becomes, and the less active the mind becomes.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about opening up the gap between our thoughts.
Yes.
Which lowers the bar. I mean, oh, I could do that. I think I can do that. But ironically, it's not an effort. It's the absence of effort, right?
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you the tip that I give in the book, and when I do meditation workshops or classes, that tends to help people the most. You know, in mindfulness meditation, we just observe, right? Just watch the thoughts. And that can be helpful because now we're not identified with the thoughts. But what I can find is even more powerful. And when I teach this to people, I always get the feedback, that's the thing that helped the most, is to invite the thoughts in to the experience, into the meditation, right? So, and what I assume is any thought or sensation or feeling that comes into my awareness while I'm meditating is coming in because it wants to meditate too. It wants to become whole. It wants to experience the peace and the bliss that's there. And so that's what's called non-resistance, right? Because if a thought comes in and I label as a distraction, guess what? I'm resisting it. And I'll tell you, Michael, the phrase that I must say now 20 times a week, whether it's to clients or in classes or in ceremonies, is anything that we resist not only persists, but magnifies. Whatever we embrace becomes our ally, our teacher, and our healer.
Yeah, resistance is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
We deal with that a lot in emotional intelligence, where if you confront some heartache or some sadness or depression, some sort of anxiety-based feeling, and the more you push it away, the more you gird your loins and resist allowing it to have its way with you, the worse it gets. And then that becomes a vicious cycle. We get trapped in that, and we call it stuck, but we're really holding on. Let's talk more about letting go of that.
Yeah.
And refusing to resist and see what happens. And in just a minute, we got to take a short break. My guest is Patrick Harbula. We're talking about his new book on meditation, a practical and simple way for beginners to get started meditating, and answers to those questions about, well, how do I do it? And why is it so frustrating? You're listening to the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School on KPFK in Los Angeles, and we'll be right back after this.
Hey, this is Brad Friedman.
And Desi Doyen.
Of the Bradcast, heard right here on our flagship station, KPFK.
When people make a pledge to KPFK, a lot of them feel that they're doing it to pay for all of the listening they've done in the past.
Others do so to pay for their future listening.
And some do it as a pure expression of altruism.
A genuine, random act of kindness to ensure that others are able to listen as well.
Folks who aren't able to give right now.
Well, your support provides this service to everyone.
Do a good deed today and experience community radio karma.
Call 818-985-5735.
That's 818-985-KPFK.
Or you can just go to kpfk.org and pledge securely online. Namaste.
And thank you.
Hi, this is Marcia Louise, and you're listening to White Sun Radio on KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles and online at kpfk.org.
You're listening to KPFK in Los Angeles and 90.7 FM. If you're in Santa Barbara, you can always hear KPFK at 98.7 FM. In North San Diego, 93.7, and in the high desert, Ridgecrest and China Lake, 99.5. We stream on the internet, of course, at kpfk.org, and this program is podcast as The Ageless Wisdom or The Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, and we're on all podcast platforms, so whatever is your favorite app or aggregator. Search for us there and subscribe. We also stream on the podcast website, theagelesswisdom.com. My guest is Patrick Harbula, and we're talking about meditation and how to meditate. And I mentioned earlier, Patrick, a lot of people say, oh, I did that. I tried that. I just can't get my mind to slow down. And I've heard, I don't remember who gets credit for it. It's probably one of those aphorisms that is said often by so many people that nobody really gets attribution for it. But it's like you don't slow down your thoughts or shift your awareness in order to meditate. You meditate to change the way you think. And I think a good place for people to begin to study the way the mind works is to consider that there's a difference between applying our thoughts to a particular task, like reading or making a decision or writing a to-do list or solving a problem, as opposed to what happens when we're not task-oriented and simply, it's Miller time. You kick off your shoes, put up your feet, stare out your window. The brain still chatters, but it's got its own agenda. That's the monkey mind, or the roof brain chatter you referred to. And we call that thinking and identify with it, but my question to you is that really thinking? Is that really us?
Well, there's the analytical mind and there's the intuitive mind. You mentioned sitting in a room can be the hardest thing to do. In the Magic of the Soul, I say that why, as human beings, is the hardest thing to do? Nothing. We do sweat lodges, ceremonial sweat lodges here in my backyard once a month, sometimes twice. And when we call in the West, the West is the place of the setting sun, the place of endings and new beginnings, the place of darkness, the place of the void, right? And when the spirit of the West comes in, it always likes to remind us that as human beings, we seem to want to know everything. We seem to want to label everything. And there is a usefulness to that. And yet, when we name something and label it, we're holding it in place. And boundaries are helpful, but dissolving boundaries are even more helpful. And so what the spirit of the West reminds us is that the place of not knowing is the place of greatest power, because that's where possibilities are infinite, is in the not knowing. And so when we call in the West and everyone gets that into that place of not knowing, now we become an empty vessel that can just be filled with creativity and spirit and all these qualities. As long as we're stuck in our analytical mind, we're blocking all that beauty that can flow right through us. The channel widens when we get into the place of not knowing. And the best way to do that, as you know, is through meditation.
So how do we meditate, Patrick? And I think where I'd like you to begin to explain is what I would call an induction. Again, given my background, I do a preparation physically of letting go of physical tension in my body. But I know a lot of people just sit and start meditating and allow that to happen by itself. What are your feelings about that?
Well, there's so many techniques and so many different ways. And we were just talking about this in my class the other night, that, everyone is different. And so I encourage people, some systems will say, take a meditation practice and do that for years, until you find what's right for you. Try many different practices and find what does work best for you. I have in the book, and if you get the audio version of the book on Amazon, by the way, it guides you through the various techniques. When I do workshops, I call it a meditation sampler. Well, I'll guide people through, here's the Zen technique, right? And it'll bring people into that. And then we'll just go into silence so people can practice that. Then we'll do a breathing technique. Then we'll do inner mantra, which is just sounding an inner mantra over and over. And at the end of each one of these meditations, I do Sanskrit chanting, which I find for most people, I'm going to say 95% of people, if nothing else quiets the monkey mind, chanting does, especially Sanskrit chanting, because it's a language that's designed for spiritual understanding. And so it's a very high vibration. And so I have a very simple Sanskrit chant. I'll do it for you now. And you can also just go to YouTube and Google, Vedic chanting, and you'll find thousands of them. But this is the one that I use because it's so simple to pick up. And the words are Ram Jai, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. Ram means God. Jai means love, devotion, heart. So we're opening our hearts to the heart of God. And it just goes like this. It's repeated over and over. I'll just do it a couple times. Ram Jai, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. If you're listening, do it once with me. Ram Jai, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. Simple as that.
It almost sounds like a Gregorian chant. I mean, it makes me consider how eclectic these practices are, that chanting has been discovered independently by disparate cultures all over the world. And
right,
maybe it's less important what we chant than that we give the mind something to focus on that is harmonious and beautiful and truthful and divine.
Yeah, and breathing techniques, just watching the breath is one of the most common practices. Just watch the breath, giving the mind something to do, as you say. And you don't have to be still to meditate either. There's walking meditation, there's movement meditations. I learned several years back how to whirl, like, you've heard of whirling dervishes. It's a Sufi practice. That's an amazing practice. A friend of mine, Burl Bolerjack, leads drumming circles, and that can be a phenomenal meditative practice, just keeping a drum beat.
Years ago we did I think it was probably a decade ago, 2010, my business partner, Steve Snyder, and I did a mindfulness retreat on Maui. We were both living in Maui at the time. And one afternoon, the wind kicked up, as it tends to do on the North Shore. And we were in a clearing right on the edge of a forested place. And boy, the wind was blowing the leaves and rattling the palms. And at first I thought, oh, what a distraction. And then pretty quickly I realized, wait a minute, this is an opportunity to meditate on the sound of the wind and the sound of the leaves. And so we turned it into a 15-minute meditation, and it was glorious just to sit there with absolutely no agenda in a group listening to the wind blow through the forest. And it was almost like every tree and every leaf was another instrument in this symphony of sound.
Right.
And soon it just you began to feel the wind blowing through you, and there was like no separation between you and the forest or the wind or the sound of the ocean crashing on the shore nearby. It all became this one beautiful, unified, symphonic experience. It was thrilling.
And that's exactly what we do in Zen meditation, is rather than isolating consciousness and shutting everything out, you bring everything in. And meditation is such a wonderful metaphor for life, right? And coming back to non-resistance, if I'm resisting a sound that comes up in meditation, by the way, then it's going to take me out of the meditation. So even, I'll give you a story that I talk about in the book. I was leading a meditation workshop in Calgary at a minister friend of mine's home. And we came out of a long, hour meditation, and somebody said, that clock ticking was just disturbing me. I couldn't stay in the meditation. Someone else said, oh no, it was like a metronome that was just bringing me into a deeper state of consciousness. I was sharing with a class that I was teaching on meditation about that idea of just inviting sounds in, not only thoughts, but sounds. And And the next day, the next morning, I was meditating. We were doing some remodeling on our house, and they were drilling some pipes in the bathroom next to the room that I was in. Loudest noise I've ever heard in my house. And so I decided that the sound, this hugely loud sound, was actually the sound of God calling me deeper into meditation. It was one of the deepest meditations I've ever had.
I think that's one of the benefits of a meditator understanding the nature of suggestion and affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a client asking me once, well, what about the barking dog? I've got in my neighborhood this dog that barks incessantly and almost seems to know when I'm meditating and starts barking. I said, simply say to yourself, every time the dog barks, I'll go deeper and become more relaxed.
Exactly.
And it became an induction technique, and it really worked. And I said, and how long did the dog bark? She said, I don't know. It just got quieter and quieter, and pretty soon it just didn't exist. But when she came up out of meditation, the dog was still barking. It just was no longer part of her universe.
Right. What we resist magnifies. What we embrace becomes our ally, our teacher, our healer.
And since you've repeated that, let's talk about how a positive thinker deals with negativity. I think there's a misunderstanding about this. I'd love to know your thoughts. Seems to me if we never considered a negative thought, we would be foolish. It would just be this Pollyanna, pie in the sky, everything's going to be okay. I think that might be a good place to end up. But in the beginning, shouldn't we look at negative thoughts but just resist the temptation to dwell upon them? What's your feeling about the inevitable negativity that comes up?
I would say embrace everything. Resist nothing, embrace everything. And so if negativity comes up, to embrace it. When we embrace it, because when we resist, how I say it in the magic of the soul is this. When we resist anything, then we create a block in energy, right? So if it's a physical thing, if it's a physical pain, I'm creating a block right at the chakra, within the energy system where the pain is. As soon as I embrace, then the energy flows, and the energy is simply love, because that's the only real energy that there is. And so, shadow work is a big part of, we can only go so far into the light without addressing the shadow. I would just say, embrace it, give up resistance and embrace.
Yeah, I think if we consider that the brain knows what it's doing, if it's causing us discomfort, it's trying to get our attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if we push that discomfort away, then it's going to have to turn the volume up to get our attention. So it just that's your magnification there. But
exactly,
if we embrace what we're afraid of, if we embrace what hurts, then the hurt diminishes and the confusion reveals what we needed to understand and what the brain was trying to alert us to.
It is, exactly. And again, when we embrace and that love flows, then it's bringing love into that negativity, which is the only way it can heal. Another way of addressing this is, and if we had another couple hours, I would tell you about a story about a day of enlightenment that I had. But when I get into, and enlightenment to me is a relative term, but when I get to a relatively enlightened state, what I have discovered is that enlightenment is not being devoid of human emotion, of pain, of fear, of even anger. It's seeing the beauty in all of those things. I heard a definition of enlightenment once, and that is the enlightened person sees enlightenment everywhere they look. There is nothing that's not enlightened, right? So seeing enlightenment in my own anger, or as I say in the magic of the soul, looking for the magic in every experience. So one way of creating positivity is, if I'm having something in my life that I don't like, is ask, what's the magic in this situation? What's the greater love, freedom, joy that wants to emerge from this? That's how I give up resistance to it. But if I can't, if I'm still, in all this emotional turmoil, what's the magic in my own pain? What's the magic in my own fear? What's the magic in my own anger? When I dive deep into my own pain, what I find at the heart of it is my deepest love. When I dive deep into my deepest fear, what I find is my deepest sensitivity. When I dive deep into my anger, what I find is a value that's important to me. I wouldn't be angry if there wasn't some value that is not being honored or appreciated or embraced.
I think martial arts is a really good metaphor for all of this, because we talked about this a few weeks ago when I did a show on Feng Shui and Taoism. The idea of going with the flow and resisting nothing is central to Chinese practices, Taoism and Kung Fu and such. But in the West, people oppose each other. They put up their dukes, they square off, men anyway, and try to overcome or defeat, to conquer, to move forward against, to aggress. But the one thread running through all of the Eastern martial arts is to allow the aggressor to move toward you. You may even grab his jacket, his gi, and draw him even more quickly in that direction, not resisting anything, but then using a little flow, a little movement, a little twist of the hips, and some leverage, and bang, this big guy is on his face, and you've defeated him with a minimal amount of effort, not by opposing, but by going with the energy. And that's what nature does. The allegory of the water that comes to the boulder in the middle of the stream, it doesn't fight with the boulder. It just separates, flows around the rock, and rejoins on the other side.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing about resistance I want to say is, don't be resistant even to your own resistance. Right. To embrace everything. And so what that means is, as human beings, we want to grow, right? And it's interesting because when we're on a spiritual, I've had people say to me, because I asked the question in some of my workshops, what would it be like if your life was completely devoid of critical self-judgment? And I've had people say to me, I was actually less judgmental of myself before I embarked on a spiritual path or a path of growth. Because now I've got an ideal that I'm moving toward, that I tend to compare myself to. And what I really want to emphasize, and I say this nowadays in every interview, in every class, with all of my coaching clients, the most important thing in life is self-love. And so when I'm inviting people to love themselves more, this is the affirmation I offer, is I love myself no matter what. Because the true test of self-love is not loving myself when I just did something really cool. I just did a fantastic interview with Michael Benner. The true test of self-love is when I completely fall flat on my face doing an interview, or I say something that hurts the feelings of someone I care about, or I make a mistake that costs me $20,000. It's easy to love myself when I just made $20,000. And so if that's true, then the only time to exponentially raise self-love is to love myself no matter what, when I just screwed up, right? And so every uncomfortable situation can be reframed as simply an opportunity to love myself more.
We don't often hear the phrase or the word self-compassion. We think of compassion as empathizing with others, but it has to begin with self-compassion, just as loving others has to be recognized as a function of self-love.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick, we're all out of time. I can't believe it. How can folks find out more about you? How can they hook up?
Sure. Well, my email is magicofthesoul.com. Patrick at magicofthesoul.com. And my website is livingpurposeinstitute.com. And what I like to offer, and I haven't done this in a long, long time because I'm usually pretty I have a full schedule of clients. But anyone that wants to contact me, for your audience only, Michael, I'll offer a complimentary coaching session. And it may take a little while to get to it because my schedule is pretty full, but we'll book it up for, a month from now or whenever. And it's something I like to do for people like you, that I really care about and your audience. And if I'm too full, I'll hand it over to one of my certified coaches. But I'd love to talk to people in your audience just one-on-one. So send me an email or call me at, just go to my website and you'll find all my contact information. livingpurposeinstitute.com or patrick@magicofthesoul.com.
Patrick, thanks so much for being with us again. I always enjoy our chats, and I'm thrilled that you've written this new book. Some might say, gosh, there's so many books on meditation. My feeling is there are never enough books on meditation until everybody is meditating. And I think you've done a really good job of demystifying that. And, meditation, there's no wrong way to do it. I like the saying, if you have time to breathe, you have time to meditate.
Mm.
And we don't have to make some big religious mystery out of meditation. It's just sitting with yourself, being with yourself, and pretty quickly finding you're connected to everything that is. That separation's an illusion, and that loneliness, that alienation, the feeling that we don't fit in is also just illusionary.
Mm-hmm.
And needs to be dealt with. Patrick Harbula, my guest on KPFK. We'll do it again, Patrick, okay?
Okay, my brother. Lots of love to you and to your listening audience.
Thank you. Remember, besides broadcasting every day, we also live stream on the internet at kpfk.org. Most of these programs, except for the music shows, are podcast. This is podcast as the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, and it streams on demand at theagelesswisdom.com. As always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. This is Michael Benner. So long from KPFK, Los Angeles.